The sound of metal scraping metal lasted less than 3 seconds. But to me, it felt like the whole world had stopped. I had been inching through the crowded school pickup line in Raleigh, North Carolina, thinking about a late meeting, an overdue mortgage payment, and everything else I had failed to keep under control lately. Then my bumper touched the silver sedan in front of me. I stepped out, already preparing to apologize, but when the woman holding a phone beside the damaged car turned around, my breath caught. It was Claire Bennett, the woman I had once planned to marry, the woman I had walked away from 7 years earlier. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can heal old wounds, forgiveness can change lives, and second chances sometimes arrive when we least expect them, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about compassion, faith, and unexpected new beginnings. Claire stared at me as if she had suddenly seen a ghost. Her blonde hair moved gently in the afternoon breeze, but her expression was completely still. I wanted to say her name, but it came out as barely a whisper. 7 years disappeared in an instant, and I remembered the last night we had stood together outside a small church, talking about our wedding plans. Back then, I had been 29, stubborn, ambitious, and convinced that leaving North Carolina for a better job in Chicago was the only way to build the future we deserved. Claire had asked me to stay. I told her love would survive distance. I was wrong. Months became years, calls became fewer, and eventually there was nothing left except an unanswered message and a painful silence. Now she was standing beside the very car I had just bumped, looking older in a way that had nothing to do with age. There was a tiredness in her eyes that I recognized because I carried the same kind inside myself. I immediately offered to pay for the damage, but Claire shook her head and told me it wasn't serious. Then, a little boy came running toward her from the school entrance, followed by a teacher carrying his backpack. Claire knelt down, smiled, and hugged him. I watched quietly as she introduced me as someone she used to know. The boy looked at me curiously, then smiled before asking if I was the man who had hit their car. For the first time that afternoon, Claire laughed. Her son, Noah, was 8 years old, bright, polite, and completely unaware of the complicated history standing between his mother and me. As we waited for the school traffic to clear, Claire told me she had become a teacher after we separated. She had never married. She had adopted Noah 3 years earlier, after years of volunteering with children in need. I listened, realizing that the woman I once thought I knew had spent 7 years becoming someone stronger, kinder, and far more courageous than I had ever been. Then Claire asked about me. I could have told her about Chicago promotions, expensive apartments, and the business I eventually started. But none of those things felt important. Instead, I admitted that I had achieved nearly everything I once thought would make me happy, yet somehow felt like I had been living inside a beautifully furnished empty room. I told her I had spent years blaming timing, distance, and circumstances for losing her, when the truth was simpler. I had been afraid that staying meant giving up the future I imagined for myself. Claire looked down at her car and smiled sadly. She said she had once been angry with me, but eventually realized carrying that anger only meant carrying me everywhere she went. She had forgiven me long before I knew forgiveness was even possible. Before leaving, I insisted on taking her car to a repair shop. Claire hesitated, then accepted. 2 days later, I returned it fully repaired. But that wasn't the end of the story. When I handed her the keys, she thanked me, and Noah appeared at the doorway holding a small cardboard box. Inside was an old photograph Claire had kept all these years. It was from the summer we had first met. I stared at that photograph and felt tears forming in my eyes. Claire didn't ask me to return to the past. She didn't pretend nothing had happened. Instead, she told me that forgiveness didn't erase history. It simply gave people permission to stop being prisoners of it. Over the following months, we began meeting for coffee. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we talked about Noah's school projects, my work, or ordinary things that somehow felt extraordinary because we were finally speaking honestly. There was no rushing, no promises, and no attempt to recreate what had been lost. We were simply learning who we had become. One Saturday morning, Claire invited me to help Noah build a wooden birdhouse. As we stood in her backyard, covered in sawdust and laughing over a crooked roof, I realized something I had never understood at 29. Second chances don't always return the life you lost. Sometimes, they give you the opportunity to build something better with the person you became. If this story touched something inside your heart, please let us know by liking the video, sharing it with someone who believes in forgiveness, and subscribing for more stories of hope and human kindness. And before you go, leave a comment telling us this. Do you believe some people are brought back into our lives for a second chance, even after years have passed? That afternoon, as I drove home, I glanced at the repaired bumper of my car and smiled. A small accident had once felt like the worst possible mistake. But sometimes life has a strange way of turning our mistakes into unexpected doors. I had accidentally hit Claire's car that day, but in a much deeper way, I had finally stopped running from the person I used to be. And for the first time in 7 years, the road ahead didn't feel like something I had to conquer alone.